Whenever I practice something on the bass, I want to do it in a systematic fashion. As mentioned before, every single note on the bass shows up a bunch of times. So it is important that I really know how I can organize the notes of a scale in such a fashion that I can play it all across the neck with equal confidence no matter what key. So when I talk about the systematic way of practicing these shapes, and by the way, we're going to practice 5 different shapes. There is a lot more ways how you could play the pentatonics and how you could finger them, but I consider them specific applications, like for tapping licks or things of that nature. But usually we're really best served with having 2 notes per string, per shape. And then obviously we can wander from one shape into the next. I want you to have a look at the handouts that you'll find with this segment. There are 4 handouts, and they look at first glance pretty much the same. But take a good look, because you will find a G major pentatonic pattern and an E minor pentatonic pattern, in each of those twice. And the difference is in the numbers that you will find in those little dots. Again, the round dots and the square dots can have either the fingerings in them, or they can have the scale degrees in them. And for starters, you might want to look at the ones that have the fingerings in them, because they give you a really good overview of how these patterns and how these shapes work. Now, in this systematic system, we're really starting with the bass. So oftentimes when we're taught a scale or a tonal material, a set of tonal material, then we start with the root and we end with the root. Now, in this systematic fashion that's built on the bass, we don't do that, because we start with the instrument. And I can start a shape on my root, but if I keep going after my octave, there are still a couple more notes that are part of the scale in that position, and I want to grab them so I have the whole picture. So if we just giving you a bit of an overview of these 5 shapes to help you wrap your mind around how this is organized. You see on these handouts the 5 shapes, and I like mnemonics. They help me remember things. So I have called the pattern by sort of the way they look like. So we have pattern 1, the hexagon, because it has these 6 little corners to it. Pattern 2 is the boot, because it looks like an upside down, like a boot, you know, and then the big box and the little boxes and so forth. I feel it helps if I have a kinesthetic sort of or visual representation of it. And learning psychology also tells us that that is very powerful in learning new material. Also, I want to say, you know, the kinesthetic memory is faster than anything else. It's faster than your auditory memory, and it's faster than your visual memory. I can know how I can find the notes of my scale if I poke around, right? But that will never be as fast as just having the shape under your fingers. So that's the goal here. And I was saying some things might be a little different. So we're not going to go from root to root in each position. We're going to go from what the bass dictates and whatever notes fall into that area of the bass. So the first pattern, I'm just going to play through them so you get a little bit of an overview. So pattern 1, and we're in major now, and have, if you want to have a sheet out, have the sheet with numbers equals fingerings out, because that really helps to get organized a little bit. The square boxes are the roots, so I'm going to play this in G major all the way up the neck. So here we go. Here's pattern 1, which is called the hexagon. It goes all the way up. Then this is pattern 2. Now, it starts on the 2nd note of my pentatonic scale. And I call it the boot. Here's the shaft, here's the sole, right? Then I keep moving up. I get big box, little box, which was the one that we jammed with earlier. Now, like a glove, into that one fits little box, big box. And up on top, I have what I call the upside down boot, which looks like that. What's nice about these shapes is once you learn one, you have actually already learned half of the next one, because of the way they interlink. If you look, if I learn pattern 1, all these notes are going to show up in pattern 2, and all these notes are going to show up in pattern 3. That's one thing that's interesting. What's also interesting, when I have my major root right here under my second finger, and then I march up my little pattern here, I go 2, 4, 1, 4, right? Now that sequence is true every time I have my root under this finger. So if I have my root here, same sequence, 2, 4, 1, 4. Now this is pattern 2, right? 2, 4, 1, 4. So every time this shows up, no matter in which pattern I'm in, there are a few slight exceptions, for example, for pattern 6, but we'll get into that. But for the most part, if you know where the root is in the pattern, you are golden. So it's not when when you really have those under your fingers, it's not like you're going, wait a minute, which pattern do I need to use? Am I going to pattern 5? It's not like that. But you train your fingers to always know where to go when you know where the root is. And the beauty of that is you also know what it sounds like. Because if I know my root is here, I know that's the 5th, that's the 3rd, that's the 5th below, that's the 6th. So I have access to all these sounds by just learning these 5 shapes. So there's 2 things you need to learn when you get those under your fingers, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that if you follow along. You need to know the shape, big box, little box, boot, all that. And then you need to know where the root is. You need to know the root for the major, and you need to know the root for the minor. You don't even need to be so much concerned about the name of the shape, like pattern 1, pattern 2, and by the way, we're going from pattern 2 right into pattern 3. If you notice, there's no pattern 4. Well, why? Because it starts in the major scale with the 3rd note of the scale. There is no 4th in a pentatonic scale, so it wouldn't make sense to call it pattern 4. So we do 1, 2, 3, 5. I should say we're going from pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, into 5 directly. There's no pattern 4 because there's no 4th note of the scale. And one thing I also want to mention, because it's a question I get a lot of folks ask me, well, then that's the modes, right? And while there are modes of the major scale and the minor pentatonic scale and the major pentatonic scale, there are modes. Don't think of this system as the modes. Just think of you're a bass player and you're playing these 5 notes in a position and in a way with fingering already sorted out for you that makes sense on the bass. All we're doing is we're going all the way up as far as we can and all the way down as far as we can. But that's all we're doing. We're using these shapes. So don't think of them as modes, because you don't want to always think of starting with the lowest note. You're starting with the root. So what I'm going to do in the next upcoming couple of segments is we're gonna do an overview over each of these 5 patterns. Then I'm going to point out the features of each of these, because some are better for certain things than others. We're going to be doing a bunch of shedding, some great technical exercises that will also do wonders for your technique. We will do some musical exercises, because is it worth if we don't use it? So we're going to have some fun with an exercise that I call groove and fill. And we will also do a featured groove of each of those 5 patterns.